Nice to report a fun and heartwarming royal story. As you can imagine, lots of people say to me, are there any nicer, warmer stories, Neil, about the British monarchy? There are, and there's lots of unsung stories out there that don't get reported by the mainstream media, which we've highlighted here on our community channel. The people like Sophie Wessex, Prince Edward, Captain Sir Tim Lawrence, people like that, the brilliant Princess Anne. It's always nice to share their stories, even though they don't necessarily want to look for them in the media. But it was this particular story that I wanted to share with you simply because there's always misguided quotes going around exactly how certain royal stories really started. So today, here's a very heartwarming story that will appeal to so many of us. As ever, let me explain. Hi, good morning. Nice to see you. Let's have a big wave. Yes, good. Yes, you're doing well. I know. We've held it up a while, haven't we? Yes, exhausted now. I can imagine. I know. It's very, it's very tiring. That morning exercise, isn't it? Or evening exercise before you go to bed. I was in somewhere the other day, I don't know about you, but I look around, they have these big TV screens and it said, be more active, don't smoke, don't drink, eat fruit, drink more water. And you kind of think to yourself, didn't see anything about vanilla custards on there, you know what I'm saying? But the bottom line is, when you look at it, we all try and be healthy, don't we? But have you noticed those health officials who tell you that, you're a bit too fat, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that? They're hardly twiggy themselves. Have you noticed that? I know. Don't mean to be unkind, but, I think in the old days, when you look to those matrons, none of the matrons were skinny, were they? But nobody said they were unhealthy. Wouldn't dare, would you? Back as ever to your breaking world story of the day. This really all centers upon the very charismatic Prince George, who's growing up rapidly, as we've seen. Now, there was a story going around recently that Prince George was the instigation behind the brilliant skit at the Platinum Jubilee with our late and beautiful monarch, Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. As we've said many times on the show, to me it was iconic, and what a lasting legacy, a fun piece of filming that showed Her Majesty at her finest with her greatest sense of humour. What I like about this particular story, though, is everybody said that that particular idea was stemmed from the fact that Prince George was a fan of Paddington Bear the movie. Well, the true story is actually this, and I found this unfolded myself, simply because the celebrated author who created Paddington, Michael Bond, already had a very esteemed connection with the late monarch, dating back to her coronation year in 1953. He was part of the BBC crew that helped film that now famous coronation. What a thing to have! Mr. Bond also had an association with our wonderful monarch when he received his OBE directly from the Queen. Now, apparently he couldn't believe he'd received that, but according to him, she was already a huge fan of Paddington Bear, and they'd already discussed internally with the palace how she could become involved because she loved the story about exactly, what he was doing, that sort of thing. Now, it wasn't necessarily Paddington Bear that the Queen really liked. Also, she was a big fan of another creation from the early 70s called the Wombles. She loved the idea of the fact that they were litter picking, picking up all the rubbish that was left on Wimbledon Common. You can see a theme developing, can't you? But of course, it was Paddington that caught her imagination. And given the fact that she knew the author and his family rather well, that was the sort of impetus to get together and do something rather special, not just for Prince George, but also for Prince Louis and Princess Charlotte and all her other great grandchildren, etc. I think it's a really nice thing to find this out because, of course, the story goes, doesn't it, as ever, that it's simply just about one person. It never was with the Queen. It was all engulfing. She looked towards everybody. And wasn't it great to see the surprise on Charlotte, Louis, and George's face when she popped up on that big screen, starring alongside someone that they really admired? And yet there was Granny, if you like, starring opposite their very favourite character. But this truly all started way back, if you think about it, in 1953. Who would have known then at that coronation, as the author, would-be author, Michael Bond, could have never foreseen exactly where his creation would have taken him, not just with his association with our beautiful monarch, but literally into the royal history books.